Control self-assessment. Control self-assessment is a management technique of ensuring the reliability of controls. The importance of control self-assessment is to move then the responsibility to manage controls out of the audit shop and into the local manager. Now, the local manager must be aware of the risk and their responsibility to ensure that the controls are working correctly. This will provide a much more proactive control monitoring situation. In order to do control self-assessment, we have to provide management with the tools that will enable them to correctly monitor and report on any issues that they find. This is quite often done by selecting the areas that must be measured. There are many controls in place, but not all controls are equally important. We have to find the controls that would be the vital statistics, or the controls that truly would enable us to provide meaningful information about whether or not we have any serious issues or not. This can be performed through providing questionnaires to management of what actually is significant for them. This can also be done through facilitated workshops where we get people together, and quite often a collaborative session like that where we can each learn from each other will also help us then to augment or come to a better solution than maybe just the input of any one individual. So this is the idea now of control self-assessment. The methodology for control self-assessment is to first of all review what are the key business objectives. In other words, what are the things that could have the greatest impact on the business. Therefore, once we know those areas that are most important, identify any risks to those. Once we know the risk, we can make sure we monitor the controls specifically that address those risks. We can put in place an assessment methodology that will review and measure and monitor those internal controls that are most important for the organization. So the objective here is that instead of waiting until an audit is performed, say, 3 years down the road to find a significant problem, we can be much more proactive because each manager is looking at the important controls in their area, and this will be able to augment then the internal audit function. We are able to then perform control monitoring within the functional areas, not just through an external audit. The idea is that each department will accept responsibility for measuring whether or not their security controls are being implemented and complied with effectively. This empowers the workers and managers in those areas to actively be involved in trying to then support and secure their systems. They will also then, as a result of doing the assessment of their controls, help in the design of the controls to make sure we come up with a control infrastructure that is ideal and most effective to support those areas. And who knows that better than the people that work in that area with those systems? So the benefits of control self-assessment is that we can now have documented test procedures and audit procedures in place to ensure that controls, especially significant controls, are being managed in much more a real-time basis rather than just on a periodic or occasional basis. Now, obviously, we have to make sure that when we do these tests, that the tools themselves do not then alter or affect the data as well. The benefits then are going to be that we have much earlier detection of any type of risk. Hopefully, because of the assessment, and we can say also the involvement of the local area in designing the controls, we'll have better or improved internal controls. That department will have a sense of ownership of those controls, and every employee in that area will be aware of the significance, the reason, the justification for those controls based on then the risk that control is trying to then mitigate. This should help with better communication with all levels of management. Hopefully by doing this, we'll actually reduce the control cost because this is being done just as a part of a regular basis and be much more timely in finding any type of an issue. However, there are some significant disadvantages related to control self-assessment as well. For example, it could be seen that this is a replacement for audit, and that is not ideal because obviously a department that is monitoring itself may not always be as objective and independent as a true audit would have been. This can be quite often perceived by local management as just one more thing added to their workload, an additional workload then on management. The other problem is that when employees are empowered and they provide recommendations on the assessment and design of controls, they could become dissatisfied if we see that there's a failure to act on then the recommendations they make. If it's such that they bring to the attention of management things that could be improved and management decides not to do anything with it, it could be that they stop becoming involved in the process and the process becomes therefore ineffective. We also know that in some cases, the employees and management may not be motivated or really interested in then the controls. And that lack of involvement or that lack of, should we say, investment in the control infrastructure could definitely limit the effectiveness of the monitoring that they are providing. So what is the role of the auditor when we're doing control self-assessment? Well, as an internal control expert, they can explain to management and the employees what the risks are and why those controls are important. They quite often can provide them that justification and that link so that all of the other stakeholders understand the significance and the importance of that control. They also can help with setting out the method to be used in the assessment. How can we determine what is a good or a bad result? What is an effective and efficient way to actually perform then the assessment? And of course, auditors can hold management accountable to ensure they take responsibility and ownership for those internal controls, as well as to facilitate improvements of those controls and the monitoring process itself. Another area that's often being looked at to augment audit these days is the area of integrated audit. Integrated audit is a combination of traditional audit techniques with then using the capabilities of our IT infrastructure of today. Say, for example, in the case of a financial audit, where we can build in the capability to actually test transactions in real time. So that instead of having to do an audit on a periodic basis, we're able then to integrate the audit function or the testing of then those financial controls during the actual normal production process. This can also be done with operational audits to ensure then that controls are working, and of course in IT audit as well. For example, we can set out synthetic transactions to test a website to see whether or not it's responding correctly. This is a type of integrated audit. We can set up some type of a control mechanism that will assess whether or not our IT systems are actually working at the correct performance levels, whether or not bills are being generated correctly, so that it's a testing procedure built into or integrated into our production systems. The idea being that this can provide a much more complete, timely, and overall audit of that business process, that operation, or of course of that entity. Another area we're looking at trying to improve on is the whole aspect here of continuous audit. Instead of audit being something which is only periodic, where there can quite often be a long time lapse between a problem and it being found, we want to bring in continuous audit, where we're continuously examining, assessing, and reporting on any type of problem, so that there's a much shorter time lapse between when action is then gathered as part of an audit and, of course, analyzed and reported on. This, of course, will be much more timely than a periodic audit. Say, for example, a system that will go and check our website every half hour. So that if there's something that has changed on the website, it immediately bring in an alert so we know that maybe there has been a corruption of that website. Something which is being done on a continuous basis and can identify and help us fix a problem even before customers have noticed it and reported it to us. Let's compare a couple of things. Well, continuous monitoring. Continuous monitoring is the idea today of something like antivirus, which is sitting on a network and checking all of the network traffic in real time, looking for some type of malicious code. That is a form of continuous monitoring. We also then have this idea we've just mentioned of continuous auditing. Continuous auditing is a form of automated control and risk assessment. It monitors our controls in real time. It collects audit data, say for example at the moment of a transaction is being done. So we can see that there is obviously a comparison between these, but there is also a difference between them. Whereas continuous monitoring is very much real time, we can say here, of just monitoring traffic. Auditing is actually to examine and test those controls in real time to make sure they're working. In order to set up continuous auditing, we need to have some type of automated tool. And there are a number of tools we can use for this that will help us to perform then continuous assessments of a network, an application, or of a system. We must set out thresholds, key performance indicators, that could indicate if there is some type of an alert or some type of a problem. That should, of course, then trigger an alert to auditors or administrators to take action because there is something which is an exception which has been noticed by the continuous auditing tool. The idea of continuous auditing, of course, is that the information that it generates is only going to be as good as the rule base that it's built on. We must ensure that our continuous auditing rules are then set to be accurate and exact so they will not cause false alarms or a lot of, shall we say, quite often false positives that could cause then the auditors to become desensitized or not to react because this is a continuous false alarm that is coming in. Even more dangerous, though, than a false positive would be a false negative, where the actual continuous auditing tool does not pick up a problem and leads us to a perception that everything is working fine when actually, in fact, it isn't. We should, of course, use continuous auditing as a way to demonstrate to management that we are actively and proactively managing our systems and networks. These can be used in the generation of other audit reports to indicate cases where, for example, the audit we've performed is being augmented by a type of continuous auditing tool which is running all of the time in between the points of the time of conducting the audit. In summary, this is the end of this course on the process of IT auditing. It's important as a CISA candidate that you should be familiar with risk-based audit techniques, sampling, the format of an audit report, and areas such as control self-assessment.